All right. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thanks to you. Um, yeah, it seems, I mean, I intended to present this paper, but it seems that it is also now a topic that we probably um, are talking in many other contexts as well. So it's something on conflict and mental health. And we are now observing in the world, and especially the conflict that is happening in Ukraine. And so that is also reminding us that actually how it can affect in every parts of the world. And so I'm going to talk about mainly the issues related to the mental health of women and their children, particularly those younger children. So this is a joint work with a bunch of junior colleagues. Abu Siddiqui, he just started at the King's College London. So, and the other two Tanvir are from BRAC Institute of Governance and Development. And Tabassum is doing public health PhD in Australia. So just to give you a little bit of motivation about why we are actually concerned about this issue, is this forced displacement is a major cause of mental health problem, and globally around 80 million people are at the moment are displaced people, not living in their country or place of origin, forcibly displaced. And these people are constantly facing a different sort of mental health issues, particularly due to the pre and post and migration related issues. Pre, when the conflict happens, they face a number of issues, including physical torture, experience with violence, both directly and indirectly, and also post-migration following when they settle in another place. And also the issue is that, in particular for the women, these are important challenge, because women also face not only physical torture, but also in some cases, sexual tortures, and also intimate partner violence when they are in a place like camp, or where the places are not, they cannot protect them in terms of the way that they live. So women are particularly vulnerable, and we know that children are also who face problem, especially during the earliest stage of their life, can have long-term consequences in terms of later, both in terms of the human capital accumulation and any other outcome, economic and non-economic outcomes. So during their adulthood, they might suffer some severe consequences that they had not contributed to, but they experienced. And so what we are trying to do here is to try to understand whether a multifaceted psychoeducation program targeting the refugee mothers and children can actually improve the mental health problem first, both of these groups, plus some of the health outcomes and well-being, where like more about social and emotional well-being that we can think of. So it's a kind of intervention that we are trying to examine to understand the effects. So to give you a brief background, we all probably know about these subjects because of our proximity, and most of us know about it. So the Rohingya refugee people coming from Myanmar are kind of a stateless population, one of the largest stateless population in the world. And in 2017, the major incidents happened, which caused a lot of displaced Rohingya minority people living in Myanmar, and most of them migrated to initially Bangladesh, some of them then later migrated to other parts. But it's still, say, 750,000 people are living in Bangladesh among those who were forcibly migrated in 2017. And there were other migrants from among the Rohingya community already living in Bangladesh before that, because of they were also forcibly displaced before. But the 2017 event is the one that we are here mostly interested in. This population are living in a particular area in Bangladesh, in Cox's Bazar, in southeastern part. And so they are forcibly displaced. We all know the genocide and other things that happen in Myanmar, and also the subsequent news and other things that happened there in terms of the abuse, both when they were actually in Myanmar and on the way. And also there are also reports that they are subject to intimate partner violence in the camp, in the Rohingya refugee camp in Cox's Bazar. So and there are estimates which suggest that almost 80,000 Rohingya children are having severe mental distress and disorder, and they are also suffering at the same time malnutrition and other poor health, stunting and anemia and other issues. So it's a important issue in the context of conflict and also in the context of our region. The Rohingya population are basically stateless, and because of the suffering and torture that they experienced in Myanmar and subsequent situation that they are having could have a long-term effect. So that's what we are interested.
In fact, Asad, just a question. I guess. So, I'm just wondering. I mean, while I can understand why there would be this, high mental stress and distress, I'm wondering, is this a well-documented fact among displaced populations which have, for example, like in Africa, where they have been staying in camps for many years with some level of stability? Are there documented evidence that such places also have very low, very high mental distress? Or is it something about the fact that this is not a very established thing, it's a very soon thing, there is a lot of uncertainty, and that is basically, so this mental stress is generally even more in this kind of population. So I'm wondering whether these kind of issues have been studied in those more stable kind of displacement regimes.
Yeah, so far, I mean, there are some evidence in terms of the survey evidence among the displaced population, and the estimates suggest that mental health issues are more than double among the displaced communities in general. But it depends on also, I mean, the circumstance that you face. I mean, the severity of the conflict that you have experienced. So I have worked in the context of Cambodia, where we didn't particularly examine the mental health issues, but we looked at the long-term effects of mental health of the children who experienced this Cambodian genocide. And we also see that a lot of adverse consequences later in life. So, I mean, in terms of the evaluation, we are not aware of any intervention examining the mental health intervention among refugee communities. So if we look, yeah, thanks. If we look at kind of our baseline survey, we see roughly half of the survey respondents, mothers and children, are in trauma, and 1/5 of them are in a depressive situation. and a quarter of the children were stunted or underweight. So, and this situation, I mean, the children that we are examining is basically 0 to 2-year-old children, and the mothers are relatively young because they are all carrying these babies. So, so basically, these are the young population who are kind of, a lot of fathers are not in this camp. Either they were killed or they have moved to some other places because they, at the time we did the survey, and they were not allowed to work in Bangladesh outside the camp. So that means they had to rely mainly on the assistance. And so some of the men actually flew to other places.
I have a quick clarifying question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so for those who are 0 to 2 years old, I can, the outcomes of stunting, underweight, whether they are underweight or not, okay, that's understandable. But how are you evaluating depressive symptoms among younger children? Is that parent reported?
Yeah, it's parents reported. There are measures developed by a psychiatrist, and it's basically reported by parents. Yeah. So we follow the American. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no. So what age group is it? Because of course in that 0 to 2, I'm supposing it's not that age group you're talking about depressive symptoms. So what is the age group when you're talking about psychological trauma, perhaps post-traumatic stress disorder, and maybe depression, anxiety? So what is the age group of children you're talking about?
Oh, the age group of the children at the time of the baseline survey, they were 0 to 2-year-old. Yeah. So okay. 0 means here 8 weeks old, older than 8 weeks. Yeah.
Right. But in that population, I mean, that early, how do you assess? I mean, I'm not very sure, like depression, anxiety in that age group. For little older children, I can understand, like there's a diagnostic criteria, CIDI or DSM-5 now, but yeah. Then psychological trauma, PTSD, depression, anxiety, how do you assess in that?
Yeah, so we use basically PTSD and some measures developed by American Psychiatric Association for this age group. So we had psychologists who actually were part of this intervention. They developed also the measures in terms of using that measures, but also adapting in the context.
Okay, yeah, I mean, because my concern is that it's parent reported is not it's not a limitation per se, but I'm more concerned that the age group you're talking about evaluating mental health issues, so that maybe I'm just not aware of the literature, but that's where, I mean, like for a 2-year-old kid or a 1-year-old kid, right? How do you assess these? I mean,
children are given some times to react or interact or to do something, and so it's basically observing the children in many cases, and in some cases it's the parents' experience that they go through the children, so whether they face those situations.
Right, it's probably a lot of the parental in terms of what they perceive is their mental health, and that they're essentially reflecting in the responses for their children as well. That's what I suppose.
Yeah, that's a good point. We have tried to address that as well. Yeah, that's
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah. Thanks.
Good. Thanks. So the psychoeducation that we cover is basically try to cope with the mental illness, and we provide education, information, counseling, and kind of a safe space for sharing through culturally appropriate play activities for children and childcare and play. And I will explain in detail what they are actually, how we actually did that. We focus on this, whether this psychoeducation program among the Rohingya refugee community can improve the psychological well-being of mother and children's socio-emotional, physical, cognitive, and anthropometric outcomes. And so, as I said, as far as we know, that this is the first experimental evidence of this kind of intervention. So the program was developed by BRAC, Institute of Education and Development, and some psychologists they engaged with for this project. Right? So it's a year-long program and interrupted by the COVID, but continued after a few weeks of initial disruption due to COVID. I'll mention the time frame as well. So this is a kind of a session, group-based session, which happened every week. And so there are 4 parts of the session, about an hour-long session. The first 15 minutes is basically greetings and last week's homework, and this kind of, you can say, so this is the kind of, and just to illustrate how this, so first they come, they greet each other, they relax, they have some, you can think of like yoga kind of activities or some other relaxation activities they are doing together, just to, more about exchanging wishes to each other, this kind of things. And then the next 20 minutes focuses on the well-being issues of the women, focusing mainly on how things are going and what, each week has a different curriculum setup developed, but mainly focusing on the women and their well-being and how things, if anything that happened to their personal life, or if they want to share anything, whether they have experienced through any other issues that can be dealt with in the group setting. So it's called the program. The part of the program is called Amar Bhalo Thaka in Bengali. So it's basically also healthy activities, self-diet, and other kind of communication, positive thinking, and how to cope with stress, anxiety, and also sometimes playing women themselves a little bit of play-based activities. So this is a kind of situation that this is just to illustrate. So it's more about even sometimes some cooking tips, some fun activities doing together.
One quick question. So the mothers, do we have any information about the characteristics of the mothers who did not volunteer? I'm just thinking if perhaps those who volunteered are more motivated, maybe better educated, they're seeking help, they're invested in their well-being, their child's well-being. So are they any different along any observed or unobserved characteristics compared to those who did not volunteer? Do we have any information on those who did not volunteer for this program?
So remember, this is a randomized control trial. So initially, before assignment, they did not know whether they will be assigned to treatment or control. So at the baseline, so everybody was surveyed. Then some of the women were randomly assigned to treatment group, others not in the treatment group. So,
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
Got it. So when you say mother volunteers, so I somehow was thinking that the ones that are in your data, they are the ones that basically agreed to be in there. So that's not the case, right? So everybody who, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the mother volunteers are those who are actually coming from the community, but they are hired by BRAC. So they are Rohingya people. They are just facilitating the session because you need to interact with their language. They understand. I have gone there personally, and they understand Bengali when you speak, but they cannot speak Bengali. Most of them, but you can say they understand you. So I could not understand them, but they could understand me. So
Asad, just a clarification. So first the mothers volunteer, and then you randomize across them, or you randomize across women, and then some of them don't take part, but some of them volunteer in the treatment group.
Sorry, the mothers are different. So I should distinguish. The mother volunteers are the people who are actually organizing the session, and the mothers are recruited like they are the children's mothers, children and the mothers. So these are mothers from within the camp, and who have children between 8 weeks to 2 years old.
I see. So you list all the mothers, such mothers who have volunteered, and then you randomize between, you ask some of them to do it and others you don't.
That's right. Yeah.
I see. Okay.
And then the next 20 minutes is for children. Basically, again, children to play with mothers and how mothers can interact with children. Mainly play-based activity, which is basically their own play materials, like with very indigenous thing, and then just how to interact with child. Sometimes storytelling, sometimes engaging with child in different ways. So that was the next 20 minutes, and then the final 5 minutes is basically what they should do during the week with the children and themselves for themselves. So because there were issues in terms of whether we did anything in the control area, group area, and whether because these women might be benefiting just because of the social interaction, not because of the program, because they gathered together and so we actually had unstructured social gatherings in the control group. So just to eliminate the possibility whether the effects that we are observing are due to our intervention or is it due to the social interaction. So we had this design. In terms of the design, we went so there are at the time there were 33 camps in Rohingya in the Cox's Bazar. And we worked in the 17 out of 33 camps. And I can show you the camps. The camps are located in the Cox's Bazar area. You see they're all in the border area of Myanmar and at very end. And so these are the dot points are the camps. It's very crowded place. Any camp you go there is worse than any slums that I have seen actually. And then within camps there are blocks. So you can think of each of the area, and then there is a block that actually is defined by the camp authority. It's not defined by us. And so, the blocks are basically some roads. You can easily say whether this is block A or block B or something. And there are these are marked well, but you can see that they are very crowded actually, even though they are blocked within the camp, but the camps are very crowded.
Is the administration slightly different? I mean, in terms of, do they have different authorities in charge? I'm just wondering what the significance of having a block is.
So it's basically for allocation and distribution of different things to, the different agencies, including, in addition to government, international agencies also work. So it's easier for them to work in joining them in different groups. So
I see.
I think that's the reason.
Did they share anything in common, like from where they have come from, or in
Yeah.
terms of some equalization of population
Oh,
across
no.
different blocks?
Yeah, so there wasn't, I mean, when they came, usually they came in group, but a lot of them dispersed at the initial stage. There were a lot of, chaotic situation in Bangladesh as well, because how to organize this group and whether to say, allow them to settle in, or a lot of issues. So people didn't, the Rohingya people didn't have any choice to whether they can go with their friend or not in the same camp or not. So there wasn't any choice. If something happened, it happened by chance. Usually the Bangladesh army was in charge at that time in terms of allocation. My hands is talking to them. It didn't seem to me that they had any choice, and in fact many of them initially at least were separated in many ways and could not meet because they could not find each other for a while. So it wasn't really that they had the selection issue in terms of the where to go.
Thanks.
So we had picked out 251 blocks out of around 2,000 blocks in these 17 camps. And then we randomly assigned them into 100 into treatment and control group, on 37 in treatment and 114 in the control group, the blocks. And so in each block, we had about 14 mother-child pair we surveyed, and either in the treatment or control group. And usually we had 2 sessions, 7 mother-child in one session. And as I said, these are mainly 8 weeks or something. And then 2 years of age. And then we had, in terms of the total sample, is 3,500.
Quick question. So
Yeah.
in terms of the assignment to the treatment or control group, how were they done? Were they done within the blocks, or just randomly across blocks? How were they chosen? Because I'm just thinking in terms of the situation, was there the different block? I mean the camps in the different blocks in different regions, could they have been, differences in terms of, like, one was better managed or better facilities? So could there have been such differences along the blocks by region, depending on where they were located?
No, because again, I emphasize that this is a randomized control trial. There was no such thing, because we picked the 251 blocks for treatment or control group. They did not know whether they will be in treatment or control. We assigned them. Basically, we did start running, and then decided whether one block will be treatment, another block will be control.
Right.
So question is of ex-post balance. Yeah. I guess that Asad will come to the ex-post balance later, I guess.
Yeah. So it's done blindly, and if there is any difference, there could be, but in terms of I can show you that in terms of observable characteristics, that we can say if there wasn't any difference.
Yeah. So right. So what I was trying to get at, when randomization was done, I understand that it's a randomized control trial, but in terms of how the randomization itself was done, right? So you're randomly picking the treatment and control groups regardless of their location, or within each block, from within the blocks, you're treating the
randomized block is the
groups.
Yeah, the randomization block is the randomization unit. Remember the 137 treatment block and 114 control block. So we did not randomize the people. So people within the block are all either treatment or control group, because we didn't want the spillover to happen within the block. Okay, so The block is the unit of randomization.
I see. Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Clear? Yeah. So we have the scam block, and then the respondent, the people. There are 17 camps. There are almost 2,000 blocks, but out of the 2,000 blocks, we picked 251 blocks randomly, and then within that 250, and then we surveyed all these 251 blocks, and then after survey is done, we randomly assign one block into treatment, another block into control. We had 137 treatment, 114 control, and anyone within the block will be either treatment or control, but not both.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of the timeline, so we started this project in 2019 in September at the baseline. Then this session started from October and continued till the COVID hit face to face. Then when COVID hit, so we had to stop, and then BRAC wanted to continue. And so the way it happened is that it happened over the phone. So the session that I described is basically the face-to-face session. When it happened over the phone, the good thing was because these women were already part of this intervention, so it was easy to actually contact them with them, and also talk to them, and because the same people who conducted the session are also involved in the phone conversation with the mother. So definitely they couldn't do any physical activities there, but they had more about counseling services, and it was about 20 minutes long phone conversation. We happened for 20 weeks, and then we finished at the end of September. After that, we started the online survey. BRAC was actually asking us to finish the project so that they can expand it among the control area. So we after the inline, we basically ended up the project. We could not continue, and from the humanitarian context, we probably just didn't want to continue as well.
Asad, because the COVID comes in between, and I know the effects of COVID will be different out between the control and treatment. But I'm just, do you have a sense of whether there was an additional distress or mental trauma because of COVID, or was it something that, was not really so salient in the minds of these people who were probably facing more, immediate problems?
Yeah, we did. I mean, I not among this group, but we did a survey just during the COVID because of my interest on COVID-related issues. In fact, this was not their main area of concern. I mean, the problem that they faced was enormous. So, yeah, so there are definitely some concern, but in fact, at the beginning, because of the restriction of movement of the people, so the information was not really there that much. They knew something is happening, but they really were not sure actually what is going on.
Thanks.
Also, regarding the telephone interviews, so I suppose that they were not a part of the initial program design, and because of COVID, is that correct? That because there could not be in-person interactions that.
Yeah. It's just that was the only way we could do. Yeah.
Right. So how was the correct? So how is the program adapted in the sense like the games, the part of the discussions, those did not take place in terms of within a social group, right? So how is the program adapted when you were doing these telephone?
So it was a one-to-one conversation between a mother and the counselor. So it wasn't any group-based settings, and there wasn't any, I mean, we didn't ask, basically it's about chatting with mothers and any conversation that they would do in the group setting, that this sort of conversation happened, and what they could do, or how they can maintain. And in fact, there was some information related to COVID at the time, just to relieve the stress that they might be having because of the COVID and other issues.
Okay,
So,
okay, and perhaps you'll get to this later, but I'm just wondering because the program, I mean, the in-person interactions and was designed to be very different from the telephone interaction. So if you look at, I mean, if you compared those as two different phases, sort of, in terms of the program implementation itself, in terms of the impact on psychological, well-being. Because the original program was to be in terms of in-person interactions, have games for children, their kids, but then so the effect would be very different, average effect, compared to if you divide it up by in terms of the phase, whether it was in person versus telephone. And if you had found any differences in terms of, you would think that there would be, I suppose.
Well, unfortunately, we could not do anything, right? So during the COVID, if we had done any, assessment after, as soon as the COVID is hit, or just at the time, but nobody knew that, so it was not in our hands. So basically, we had to go through whatever way is feasible, and also in the context of this intervention, we wanted to continue for a year. So that was also in our plan in terms of the plan that we gave to even American Economic Association registry before the start of the intervention. But we wanted to complete the module, so that's how we did actually. But it definitely is going to be different effect, and we don't know. But one thing is because it happened in the middle, not in the beginning, so that can give us some kind of comfort that maybe the effect that is we are observing is a continuation of the program that we had done in 24 weeks in the face-to-face session.
Nice. Okay. Thanks.
So in terms of, because you were asking also the measures, so these are the measures we use, basically all validated measures. Is Kessler scale plus American Psychiatric Association measures. And I'm not the expert. That's why we have this Tabassum, who is doing public health. She's mental health person, and we try to follow basically all the literature that are standardly used in the context, even the conflict situation, or the measures that are used in some parts of Africa and other conflict affected area. We had, in terms of the children assessment, I had done it before in the context of early childhood intervention. Basically, we followed ages and stages questionnaire. So for different age groups, they have different set of questions and in terms of the child developmental outcome. But in addition, we have measures, anthropometric measures, and also as asking more about trauma and depression. So these are measures also developed for different age groups and verified well in the context as well. So so the outcome that I'm going to talk is more all standardized. Just in this because I'm probably running late. So what we have done is basically, because we did the RCT standard method is simple OLS kind of exercise. We control the baseline outcome measures wherever we have baseline measures. So it's kind of ANCOVA model, and we use the fixed effects at the level of camp, because we had 17 camps, and then and standard errors clustered at the level of randomization, which is the block. So these are all OLS measures. You can, so this is the main results. I'll go to the table to show you the number. So you have, if you look at, it doesn't matter in terms of whether we control or not. Control for any characteristics that you can imagine. So we have all the balance statistics you can check in the paper. So we did a lot of balancing tests. No major issue. In terms of the impact, so this is the impact. If we look at the column 2, which is controlling for all the covariates, we see that the trauma, depression, all decreases. And among those who were depressed in the baseline, the depression actually decreased significantly more, 0.28 to 29 standard deviation. And for trauma measures, we have 0.23 standard deviation decrease. So, and also in terms of the mother well-being, we see the impact, positive effects on both happiness, belongingness, and any composite measures of social well-being. So this is the effect on mothers. If you look at, even based on the boy or girl child, doesn't matter much. There is not much happening in terms of the statistical significance. So that's the black one is the overall effect, and then the colored ones are for male and female child. In terms of the child health outcome, both child trauma, depression, and child development outcome in communication, gross motor, fine motor skill, problem solving, and social skills. Again, these are all ages and stages questionnaire. You see here the effects are we can do here. So the effects are about 0.1 standard deviation for both trauma and depression. And we see the positive effects on all these child developmental outcomes. So again, boy-girl difference doesn't seem to be that prominent. So if we look at the child malnutrition, way for age improved by 0.64 standard deviation, which translates into 635 grams, and height for age 0.52 standard deviation, which is equivalent to 1.58 centimeters.
Asad, can you give me an idea of what would be called a theory of change here? Because with depression, anxiety, those things I understand because your psychoanalysis, this particular intervention seems to be dictated at some sort of engagement with the child and so on and so forth. I can even understand undernutrition because it could be that children don't eat, but then eventually they feel better. They might be eating. Malnutrition is what is the connection between the intervention?
So so the module also involved in terms of the feeding practice.
I see.
In terms of the food that they should give within the constraint that they have, and when to feed. They will complain, for example, that child is not eating, irritating, or doing things. So then they will give some suggestions and to actually what to do to actually help child to eat and grow up. Actually,
I see.
So because these are also part of the physical development is also related to the mother's mental health issues. So that's what combined here.
Okay, thank you.
So we try to understand whether is it, the channel to understand. It could be that the mother's physical health improve, which could ultimately translate these outcomes in terms of the improvement. We do not see that much happening. We don't see between treatment and control group in terms of the disagreement with partners, helping with chores by any members, or so just to rule out any alternative mechanisms. So the basic point is to say that whether it's due to our intervention or is it something else happened that could have actually improved this mental health outcomes of the treatment group, but not the control group. But we don't see the difference. In terms of the child developmental outcome, we see some potential mechanisms. We observed that mother's time is very important, and that is different in the treatment group compared to control group, and that is likely an important contributor for the child developmental outcome that we are seeing, and also child mental health outcome. We see also the child in terms of the negative parenting, like beating or torture. Sometimes we do. it has decreased, and also whether child is walking barefoot or not in the treatment group is lower than in the control group. So that's kind of thing. And one difference that if you are interested in the gender issue is in this case of walking with shoes or not, it seems that the boys are more likely to walk with shoes than girls, and kind of can say probably if you have a one pair of shoes, probably the boy is getting priority than girl. That's kind of situation where we also see here.
Asad,
yeah.
I had a clarification. So, what was the primary source of subsistence, like food? Because as they don't have employment, as you already mentioned, where did the food and like how did the supplies come? Where did it come?
Main source is international assistance and the government of Bangladesh assistance, and they would get some fixed amount of food and everything, cash and benefit. And within camp they could work, outside camp they cannot. But within camp, you see then the activity is very not that much. I mean, when I went there, I saw some small shops around, and they probably were helping some road construction and other activities were happening at that time. But they were completely, I mean, even our car had to, we had to get the pass to go inside the camp because the army was controlling. So this was very restricted area. It was not possible for them to come out without permission. And the permission was generally not given. It's under exceptional circumstances they might have got, but not. So yeah, so mainly the assistance was the
Okay.
So that's why we did not actually measure their income, because it's basically the transfers that they are getting is their source. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We did some mediation analysis to understand what is the something going on. So we see that trauma accounts, most mothers' trauma account for child development outcome in terms most 60% for child trauma and 50% depression. What it means that if mother's trauma improved, so child developmental outcome are likely to improve a lot. And in terms of if we just decompose the child developmental outcomes and the improvement, then 60% is due to the mother's trauma, 20% is due to the mother's depression, and then the remaining 20% of trauma is due to the mother's well-being. So there seems to be the mother-child transmission a lot, actually. Particularly, the trauma improvement of mothers are mostly responsible for the child development outcome.
One question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, do we know whether if there are siblings, for example, the number of children for each mother, and
Yeah.
if you had explored that, because I'm just thinking in terms of if there were, say, instead of one, if there were 2 or 3 children in that age group, how were the results any different in terms of, it must have been, I don't know, more stressful, or it could go the other way as well. I'm not sure. But did you explore that as well? If mothers
Yes,
had
I mean,
more
yeah,
than one child in that age group, years, that
good
is.
point, very good point. We had actually mentioned that in our pre-analysis plan sent to the AEA registry. And that was, but unfortunately, the end line, we had to do it over the phone. And that means that any additional child that we had, we could not do actually. But this is a kind of, yeah.
Okay.
So we did a number of robustness checks. So one thing that what you said is we could address a bit is that we actually checked the control blocks and treatment blocks and the spillover. So there are some control blocks because of the the lottery system which are located very close to the treatment block, and there are control blocks which are far from the treatment blocks, any treatment block. So we check that, and we check the control blocks that are very close and control blocks that are far. And we did not see any spillovers happening. And I could say, because if you visit there, it is really difficult actually. I mean, interacting with people outside your own people, because it's not easy to move around actually.
It's also because Asad, the large part of the intervention happened over a personalized phone, right? Had it been in your personal
after
settings,
24 weeks, yes, after 24. So it's half of the intervention happened. So I mean, even the intervention happened over phone, I mean, in India, even in the normal in the community, people do interact, right?
yeah.
During COVID, in the village settings, people, we talked to each other, went to each other's houses, so it could have happened. Maybe it happened less than normal situation, but I'm sure this
Yeah, of course. It's just that when you do these experiments, sometimes other people see the experiment being done, and then they're curious what's happening.
Right. So if it didn't happen in the first 24 weeks, then you would expect that the initial level of enthusiasm gone. So maybe it would not have happened. Yeah.
Right.
Asad, one more clarification I have. So during the entire 44 weeks, was it the same person delivering the psychoeducation services to that particular respondent?
Yes, it was generally the same person. I mean, unless something happened to the person, but we stick to the same person. Yeah.
And were you able to control for this individual person effects?
Oh, okay, so there could be like the within. I mean, we have the fixed effects of the. So if you could do that, then that will address the issue. So that's been controlled for. Yes.
So relating to that point, I mean, is there any? I mean, so was that monitored? I mean, so the person who was, I mean, the mother who was, at least during the in-person meetings and sessions, is there any way to assess in terms of the intensity of that treatment? So, for example, they were supposed to, be for 20 minutes with the child and with play and games. So whether that was effectively being followed or not, because that the treatment adherence itself from the part of the mother, for example, those who were rendering the the treatment, if there were deviations on those lines and whether they were actually following the protocol, because it's very well known that if you are not delivering the protocol as designed, then you would expect that there would be differences in the outcome, right? So
Yeah,
is
that
there
is,
any way that that was monitored in terms of the intensity or the adherence of the treatment intervention?
I mean, for any program, how you implement
Yeah,
actually matters,
that was
right?
my question.
So it's not only particular to this program, and this is kind of treatment effect within the, I mean, it doesn't affect the average treatment effect. I reported here. I mean, depending on how intensely the program was followed or implemented, the treatment of effect will differ accordingly. But in terms of if you want to scale up this kind of program, probably you want to do it in a more natural setting so that you can guess kind of parameter in terms of the effects when you have a larger scale. So yeah, that is always the case. And I mean, we don't have any measures to see whether we can monitor these people, how good they deliver the intervention. All we can say is that these people were assisted and by some program people. And so with the assumption that the program people are actively working to the extent that these people delivered or could follow the protocol, that will have effect on what we are reporting here. Yeah.
Right. I'm just thinking, like, moving forward, if the plan, what I hear is that to expand this program. So if it's possible to have that kind of a some person above the mother who's actually implementing the program, in terms of whether the number of sessions were adhered to, the treatment protocol, if it was adhered to, so even qualitative information along those lines, I think could be very important to evaluate, because as we all know that and as you mentioned, that the ultimate outcome will depend on the intensity of treatment, the protocol, the number of sessions, all of that. So if at all it's possible in the future to have someone as an oversight, or not oversight, but overviewing the program implementation, because the moment you deviate,
Shobhik, I don't see your point actually. I think I agree with Asad. I mean, this is the intent to treat, right? I mean, how it plays out in the field. I mean, when you scale up, there is going to be no control over how you can scale it up, right? I mean, what the actual implementation will be. So this is the plan, I guess, the intervention as implemented, which is, probably going to take place even if you do it at a higher scale. So in that respect, I don't think you necessarily want, I mean, it would be good information to know whether it was monitored, whether there was adherence or not. But ultimately, whatever it was, this is what BRAC is going to do, right, Asad? It's basically going to
do even this program was implemented by BRAC. If it is implemented by someone else, it could have different effect, because there is BRAC effect could be, right? So yeah, I mean, it's always the case. I mean, when we are teaching, the person, even if we teach the same curriculum, the person who is teaching is important, right? So it's always the case. So you cannot really, I mean, in our case, we try to control that, but any program, how it is implemented is important. But in our case, because it has kind of more external validity, because the program was run by BRAC, and these are the people who actually run things on the ground. So we didn't, it was not run by us, that like sometimes we academics go and try to run things on our way. So it was done in a more natural settings.
Right. I mean, I understand this is an intent to treat analysis, but I mean, don't studies look at the intensity of the program implementation? That's what I was trying to get at more, in terms of, rather than just the treatment control comparisons.
The issue is more about how do we measure the intensity. I mean, depending on it is kind of more endogenous measure. Like if you are trying to establish if we had actually designed the intervention in a way that we have different intensity in terms of the way the program was implemented, the experimental variation, then we could say. And I have done that in a different setting in terms of the experimentally varying the intensity of the treatment. But in this case, it's just a treatment or control, the binary. That's it. And but within the treatment group, there are definitely heterogeneous things happen in terms of the implementation, but that's it. But as far as we are concerned, the intent to treat effect, there shouldn't be any problem.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
So there are many issues we dealt with. So in terms of, you might say that initially that point raised that is we give them intervention, then mothers might say at the end line that we are all feeling very great because of you and things like that. So the mental health outcome in terms of the social desirability bias, we addressed this issue. I mean, recently, the paper by Seema Jayachandran and Tarun, they have a paper in American Economic Review, it just came out. So they actually use the Marlon and Brown measures, and we use the same measures to try to address those. And also, we had tried to also check whether mothers who have reported that huge improvement compared to baseline, so they might be just inflating because of our they might feel gratitude to us, so that and so we actually dropped those observations to try to understand whether dropping those mothers who have quite differently mentioned in terms of the mental health improvement could actually change the results. Didn't happen. So I think this is the last few set of results. So what we try to understand whether the treatment actually reduced the gap between mother and child in terms of the mental health outcome. So it's basically the mental health outcome of mother and mental health outcome of the children, and the absolute difference. And then whether if this treatment coefficient is negative, then it means that the gap has reduced. And we do in this that for both trauma and depression, the treatment has helped reduce in the gap between mother and children. It means that mother's mental health become more aligned with the children's mental health. And this also true for whether a boy or a girl child are there for mothers. We did some heterogeneous analysis in terms of the child gender and also exposure to violence. So the one that I report here, that exposure to violence, whether they were highly exposed to violence in Myanmar or low exposed, depending on some of the survey measures that we use in terms of whether they have directly been tortured, experienced, or someone in their households being affected directly. So high and low exposure. And we do see that people with high exposure, the mothers actually benefit more and due to our intervention. And so is for children. So to conclude, so our intervention was quite effective. I mean, in terms of the effect size, it's lower than some of the intervention. I know for example, the one in cognitive behavioral therapy that they did in Pakistan is lower than our effect is lower than that. But the cognitive behavioral therapy is different, and but our program also was implemented in for almost over a year. So which means that it was in terms of the more duration of the program is more, but in terms of the effect size is lower, particularly probably because the way is more about the educational intervention, and it was not done in the way that cognitive behavioral therapy was done. In terms of effects, we see that a range of effect, both physical and mental health. And we do see some of the effects of channeling because of the mental health outcomes improvement. And so because it's kind of delivered at the community level in the group settings, it was also very low cost. We had some estimated cost and we found that this program is very least cost and compared to the cognitive behavioral therapy and others. In fact, depending on which programs you are thinking, it's almost 1/3 to at most 50% of the intervention cost. Even though this was run over a year, the cost is actually significantly lower than those interventions. So
is the cost of BRAC in some way factored in? Because, I mean, of course, if this is implemented in Bangladesh, probably BRAC will do. But if one takes this to other contexts, then, I mean, in the costing at least, I mean, it can be implemented differently, but at least, what would BRAC, because, at some point, your BRAC people are getting involved and doing these things, right? And there is a cost to that.
Yeah, so the cost that we measure is not the research cost. Cost is measured in terms of the intervention. So which is the cost incurred by BRAC. So we got the cost estimate from BRAC. Yeah, so that's it.
Including manpower costs and all those things, right?
Yes, of course. Yeah, manpower is the main cost, in fact, in this case. Yeah. So I'll conclude here. So I'll wait for any comments. Further comments.
Okay, thanks. So there's a question in the chat. I'll just bring that up, and then anyone else, if they want to ask questions, they can. So this the link between mother-child, is it possible that that's due to some unobserved genetic commonality?
Yeah, remember we are actually estimating the treatment effect. So, and it's a randomized controlled trial. So if there is any unobserved effects, that should be balanced across treatment arms, and that should not matter in terms of the results that we report here. But coming back to the point, in fact, we have in the paper, I haven't mentioned that, is that we initially in the baseline, we could say the mother-child, mental health and physical, mental health outcomes correlation, right? You say that the mother's mental health is correlated with the child mental health. But in the end line, we see it's getting stronger. The correlation is getting stronger. So that actually tells us that actually the intervention itself has effects. It has the stronger effect is coming. We will check that is mainly from the treatment group.
Any other questions?
Clarificatory question. So you mentioned that the fathers, they don't stay full time at these camps and they go out for work. But do you have a sense of whether in areas where the mothers were treated, fathers may also have seen a positive impact on their mental health?
We don't have measures of fathers' mental health. We have measures of some asking mother about their relationship with their partner. So we don't see any difference between treatment and control group in terms of their the relationship, but we obviously don't have the father's mental health outcome. So one issue that we actually thought about is, this lot of, because sometimes could be tension for this kind of intervention. When you run this intervention, there's mothers coming for a session, and sometimes there are things that they might be talking something about their own personal issues with someone they don't know. I mean, mental health, when you are talking about mother's mental health, mothers are sharing some of the information that they are having with their partner, right? and that could actually create tension within. So the treatment, we are also concerned about that, whether the treatment actually can trigger the problem rather than reduce the problem. But at least what we observed, it didn't deteriorate, and it doesn't differ between treatment and control.
Got it. Thank you.
In the paper we have, I think the paper has been shared probably. So we have some of these results, so you could check that actually.
So Asad, is there any sense this particular package has many components? There is information component, there is a counseling kind of component. Is there any sense, even from BRAC side, whether this only works as a package, or is just merely information that is causing, like for example, if you give information about what the child should eat, the child will be probably taking meals at the right time, less cranky. Sometimes that mothers, will get upset when the child is crying a lot. So the lessening of that is basically going to, have its own effect on mental health. So I'm just wondering if there is or is it possible in some ways to unbundle this? It seems a lot of things are there in this.
Yeah, that's why we say a multifaceted program, because so many components are, we cannot really isolate the effects of one from another. I mean, I cannot say.
Anecdotally, does BRAC have an idea what exactly worked, or does it everything need each other?
So this is what I mean. They had piloted, and they thought that they need a kind of combination of this together. Again, it's based on some of the feelings that BRAC staff both at the junior and senior level, but also told us, and they think that this is basically based on their experience and wisdom. But coming to this point, I mean, you know that the asset transfer program, right? So it is effective mostly when you have a bundle of things. So, and I do think that, we always, you economists are more interested about isolating the effects of one from another. And in fact, in this intervention, we actually were concerned about the social gathering. That's why we had the control group thing. But on a more practical ground, I do think that when you want to scale up things, it's really difficult to isolate. And I would prefer, on more policy perspective, a kind of bundled program, even if it is a little bit costly, because you can be more sure that this program is likely to work. And especially in this humanitarian context, you don't want to have another experiment run and then show.
No, because the information part seems to be like very light. That's easiest, right? That doesn't even need BRAC people, that you can just paste posters all over for these kind of information on what you should feed your child. And so, given that in these contexts, sometimes there is very little bandwidth. Just wondering if there are lighter touches on this. Which one?
I have done myself not in the Rohingya context, the information effect. So particularly focusing on the children's nutritional aspect, we do see the nutritional effect. But in this case, it can impact if I ask you to spend something for, and if you have means to spend, then it might have effect. But if you do not have means to spend, then you cannot basically do it. You just have the information that you know this, but you cannot implement this. So in this setting, it is hard to implement just with the information.
Yeah, but in the age setting, it should be easy, right? Because you see the effect here. So, there is you're right in ways where you can't earn more income, then it really won't help that much. But yeah. Anyway, thanks for that.
Thanks,
I have
Souvik,
one
for
question. Do we? No, of course. Do we have time for another question or
Maybe one more.
one more?
Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of, so I'm just wondering. So programs. So there has been a randomized control trial in the US for obese individuals, seriously mentally ill individuals with obesity, and the randomized control trial was the treatment group was essentially an in-person intervention, like gym and having a mentor actually coach the individuals, compared to a telephone interview, for example, where they don't have this. But what was found is that in terms of the outcomes, health outcomes, in terms of reducing obesity, the cardiovascular outcomes, that it was over a period of over 2 years that the outcomes were quite similar actually. So in terms of the implementation aspect and expanding the program, that the reach could be much more if you have that kind of rather than in-person meetings, it may as well be very effective if you have these the telephone conversations, if the sort of the intervention can be tailored to that. So I wonder, going forward, if you want to expand the outreach or in terms of the implementation, whether that might be considered as well.
You mean telephone-based intervention?
Because in the current program, you had both the components, right? Yeah. Correct.
Well, you should read my other paper actually on mental health. Is now in the context of COVID. We actually gave them a telephone-based mental health intervention. It's still working paper, revise and resubmit in AEJ applied. So basically, we do see that this is effective, but it depends on. I mean, I believe it depends on the context. In the context of COVID, people are staying at home, so we could deliver it properly. But in this setting, because talking to people now, we all miss each other. How much we miss each other, the friends and others. We could see after the lockdown ended, right? So, and in this setting, because these people do not have any other people almost to talk to. So even talking to them and expressing their feelings with that person could make a lot of difference.
I'm surprised they have phones.
Right.
I mean,
in fact, yeah, I mean, this is the only thing that they have actually.
I see.
They were allowed to have phone, and phone is very cheap.
All right, I think
I was also actually thinking whether as part of the intervention they were given phones. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we can just formally close the seminar now. But if you want to talk, maybe a couple more minutes, that's fine.
Thank you everybody.
Thanks, Asad.
No, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah. So Biru, I'll just give you hosting and I'll stop the recording now.